Hi, Larry Buller here again. Today we're going to talk about inserting instruments into panels and generally working with panels. And just about all CADs have some sort of provisions for inserting another drawing into an existing drawing. EasyCAD used a process called insert part. DraftSite, AutoCAD use a process called insert block. QCAD actually inserts blocks as well, but they go about it just a little bit differently. They actually use the import is what they call it, and they've got a nice little icon for it. A couple things to notice about importing blocks is that all of the layers original drawing has will be imported into your drawing. So let's just open up a drawing now. We're just opening this. We're not importing it. We're just opening it for edit. So I'm just opening up this drawing, and you see all of the individual elements are editable. They've got their own layers, and there's this one was probably made with EasyCAD. I can tell because it's got the standard layer. The standard and merge are a couple of standard layers that EasyCAD had. In any case, the layers, even though they may be different, the layers are still the same. When we save this, all of the layers are saved in the drawing. We save it, and so if we just start a new drawing now, in QCAD, I've got a template that loads up all the standard layers and such. One thing to remember, when you insert a block, it does not have to be inserted on any particular layer. My current layer is layer 0. When I insert the block, all of the layers will come up on the correct layer. To prove that, I'm going to erase several of the layers that I've got. Layer 0 we can't erase. And I'm going to insert that drawing that we just saw. So layer drawings, instrument, standard, and altimeter VSI. So looks just the same. I'm just going to click the mouse, and there it's on my drawing. So now we started out with layer 0, but now we've got layer 2 and bezel layer. One thing you'll notice that in this particular drawing, the colors are not associated with layers. They're all white. Now we can associate colors with layers, and in later versions of the DXF that's possible. Right offhand, I don't know what version this is, but we can just assign red for that layer, and now red becomes visible for layer number 2. For bezel, let's just make that blue. And so now any new entities saved on that layer will be that color. So let's just save that. And again, just start out with a new drawing. To prove a point that the layer we insert these parts on don't make any difference, I'm going to start with layer 0 as my current layer. I'm going to insert that altimeter. And now I'm going to make layer 2 as my current layer. I'm going to insert it again. I'm going to make the bezel layer my current layer. And save it again, make outside my current layer, and save it again. The current layer has no bearing on what happens to the layers that are in the original drawing. The one thing we see now is that when I click on any part of this, it becomes one complete object. I can move it around about the insertion point. Earlier when we were talking about drawing instruments, we said the insertion point should be in the center of the instrument. That's because it's easier to line these up, and you'll see more about that a little bit later. For the moment, let's just save this to drawing number 1, go back over to AvCam, and open up drawing 1. So now I have layer 2 highlighted. AvCam tries to open up the last layers that you've used. So layer 2 is on this drawing, so it opened up the layers that were on the drawing. We've got things on the bezel layer. They are also where they're supposed to be, regardless of what layer we placed these instruments on. Let's just go back to 2. Let's just simulate it to see if it simulates properly. And it appears to simulate just fine. We've got the concept of a block, and the block can be moved around. We can move the whole instrument. Bear in mind, many of the drawings that were made in our drawing library were made in QCAD, and that has a couple of things that we need to consider. Number 1, layers will not have any associated colors, which is not a problem. We can independently change the colors. That's not a big deal. But what is more of a big deal is that when these things get saved as a DXF, all this grouping goes away. As opposed to QCAD, when we save these files, all that grouping will stay. To prove that, let's just save it, close out this drawing, open it back up again, and there's our drawing 1, and let's see, yep, it's still all grouped together. Very, very handy for moving things around. The whole idea is to draw something once, save it so you can reuse it later. So that brings us to the idea of editing panels in the drawing library. So let's just close this out and open up a drawing from our library. Our library consists of aircraft and instrument folders. These are distributed with the Panel Pro. They are by make, model, and serial number. For instance, Beech. We're fairly well represented in the Beech area. Let's take the 90s. We've got E90s, C90s, F90s. And then these are by the serial number. So you see this is an LJ 1357, which is the serial number. And it's a pilot cut. Now, when it's got the word cut in it, that's my own designation to show us that it's got instruments already in it that we can edit. If you've got a panel that you're working with, you want to find one of the serial numbers that is closest to what you're working on. So let's just take this one for now, and let's just take a look at it and see what we got. Now, one of the must-dos if you're going to edit any panel is the first thing you want to do is save it to a new name so you don't wind up messing up a known good panel. So let's just save this, save as, and I'm just going to use my old number 1 again. So now we've got layer 2, bezel, and outside. So if we just hide everything by clicking the little grayed out eye, everything goes away. Now we can turn on individual layers. So let's just turn on outside. Now this outside is a mandatory name. It can be outside 1, outside 2, that is fine. You do want to avoid having 4 digits at the end, or even something like period and 3 digits, because it will be construed as a numeric entry, and AvCam will think that that is the number of thousands that you want to go below your 0 point, which is typically your material surface. Outside 1, outside 2 is fine. Outside 0001 is not fine. You do need to make sure that all of these entities are joining. And if you're using this particular one is made out of arcs. Big long entities are easy to edit. Itty bitty small entities are difficult to edit. If you've got a curve up here that is comprised of a whole bunch of little line segments, you may want to go down here and explode it into line segments so that they are more easily edited. In the corners, using the Measure Pro, you can measure these arcs if you wish. Generally, it's easiest just to use the rounding command. Most other CADs call this fillet. QCAD calls it the rounding command. The endpoints of this arc exactly match up with the lines they join with. This is crucially important because if they don't, you will get a error in AvCam telling you that you've got gaps in your drawing and you'll have to come back and change them. So even if you measure these with the Measure Pro, that'll give you a good idea of what radius to use. But since you've got this corner, the upper right corner, lower left corner, all of them should be basically the same radius. You can just go ahead and normalize those. In this case, they're 1/4 of an inch, 0.25 inches. You can make all those corners exactly the same rather than having 1.255 or 1.245 and so on. Just make them all the same. The biggest point is that they have to match exactly. So the other thing is, say for instance you've got a entity that is just a little bit of a gap here, and AvCam tells you you got to fix it. Well, I've seen a lot of people just take a little line segment and draw it in there. Sometimes that will work, sometimes it won't. What I recommend is just to take the end of that thing and extend it to where it does exactly match. And QCAD makes that easy. Some other CADs, not so much. We can use the zoom to extents. I've got all these other layers turned off. Let's take a look at layer 2 and the bezel layer now. Now remember what I talked to you about grouping. In this particular drawing, none of these instruments are grouped. So if you're going to move anything around, you need to make sure that you select everything. This one has an old Collins ephes. We're going to take this out and put an aspen in. One thing, I want to keep our alignment from the aspen on the same center line as what I've got here for the existing ephes. So I'm going to draw a construction line, just a temporary line. Doesn't matter what layer it's on. I happen to be on layer 0. That's fine. Okay, I tried putting a line down and it failed. And the reason it failed, first of all, look down at the command line. It says transaction failed. Please check for block recursions and locked or invisible layers or blocks. I've got layer 0 grayed out. So let's make sure the layers are all visible. Now let's try this. Looks better already. Okay. Now I want this perfectly straight up. A couple ways I could do this. Let me show you one way. I just plopped it down in the middle, and obviously we have a crooked line. I could go over to the properties and tell it to make exactly a 270 degree angle. And from its starting point, it makes a perfectly made 270 degree angle. Going to erase that, go about it a different way. Starting again, start there. Now we'll use a orthogonal switch to make this line snap to perfectly vertical or horizontal. Thing to remember with QCAD is if you want to make another line, you have to go over here and undo that so you can start another line. What we need to do is erase everything that we don't want and make sure we keep everything we do want. So you can see it selected some of the polylines that went around there, but we've still got some of these lines. Now, something interesting with QCAD is if I select a window here, I can see that I selected 2 lines. Well, I want to get rid of this line underneath. How do I get that? I can click on it. Well, it just selected that top line. If I hit Alt and then left click, it will tell me which lines are underneath that, and I can select that one and now delete it. Handy little thing. Again, that's let me get rid of that one, and just hit Alt and then select the line. Again, Alt, select. It wasn't underneath. There. It was underneath there. So it has to be, you can't window it, but it has to be underneath your pointer in order for this to work. So that allows us, it tells us what that it's a line, what layer it's on, and how long it is. So this little 2/10 of an inch long line is the one I want. That's handy if you've got overlapping lines and AvCam is complaining about it. Okay, now we've vacated the area here on our panel to put more instruments on. We'll just go to Insert, Drawings, Instrument. Let's go to Aspen. And let's put a EFD 1000 to her. We're just going to surface mount this one. So now we could possibly make it so those top three instruments were exactly across from each other. In fact, let's do that. Let's just park this off to the side a little bit and make us another construction line that starts at the center of that instrument, goes orthogonal off to the right, and I see that this right instrument is just a smidgen higher. I'm going to leave it though. And remember, now this is going to be all grouped together, and when it's grouped together I can just grab it by this handle and I don't have to give any special command to move it. And as you can see, it's above that crosshairs now. So now I am going to use the move command, and the command line says reference point. That's the part I want to move it from, and I want to move it to the target point of that intersection. I want to delete the original. Do not have this checked. It will give you lots of problems. That turns everything that you've got selected into the current layer, and in most cases that's going to give you problems. Now it's down there. So now how do we move this one up here? Here's a couple different ways we can use a quick little feature just using the arrow keys. So everything that I want is selected, and I'm moving the up arrow key now, and in my settings I've got this set to move 10 thousandths per click. I can move left, right, up, and down. I forgot to include the text, so we'll just move that quick here. Now say for instance we wanted to make this into a block just like this. We can make this press to test into a block. Just highlight it. This can be done with any of these ungrouped items. So now we've got it highlighted. Go to block, create block from selection, and the command line is asking for reference point. So I click on the intersection, and now we can name it just push to test. Now I normally have my block list turned off to preserve drawing space, but we can go over here to view block list, and this shows all these unit circle things are things that EasyCAD put in there. Let's see if we can get rid of them. It's a good idea to clean up your drawings. Get rid of blocks and things that you don't use. So go to block, purge unused blocks, and bam, they're gone. You can do the same thing with layers. Some people have all kinds of excess layers. You can just hit purge unused layers and all those extra layers go away. So say for instance we want to install another press to test. A couple ways we can do it. You can either highlight it here, hit Control C, and then hit Control V, and we can put another one someplace. Or you can go over to your block list, click it, and then click Insert, and you have the same thing going on. At this point, we're just going to delete those couple extra ones, and you can close out this block list so we have our drawing space back. One thing on the block list, you see there is a model space and paper space. Pretty much disregard the paper space. Some CADs have the ability to draw at a non 100% scale for printing on paper. Anything you draw that is going to be cut with AvCam has to be in 100% scale, and we do that in model space. So we never ever work with paper space. So now that we've got our drawing here, this is ready to save and cut, except for other changes we may want to make. Here's an RMI 30. Let's put something else there. Now, another way, I want to mark just the center line of that instrument. An easy way to do that is just with a circle, make it a nice size so it's easy to see, make it a 1-inch circle or something like that, and just make sure that it's at the intersection. So that gives us geometry where we can insert another drawing. So let's delete all the entities from this RMI. And now we've got a nice mark. Let's go here to import or insert block. Let's go to, let's put something, let's put a G5 in there. Let's put a Garmin G5. There we go. So again, the insertion point is in the middle of this, and now we can snap to the center of that existing unit. Now this is a good reason why we have bezels drawn. Now one thing we know, we happen to know that this 80-30 airspeed, the bezel is behind the panel. On this Garmin G5, we know that it's in front of the panel. We happen to know that this IND 42 bezel is behind the panel, and the G5 again is in front of the panel. In any case, we've got some clearance anyhow. It's not a whole lot, but we do have clearance between the two lines. How much clearance? Let's find out. We can go to Info, Distance Point to Point, and if we can find the middle here, there's the middle. We've got a whole 5 thousandths of clearance there. So if you were going to flush mount this, you'd have to find some way of putting in the mount for the flush mount. Be a little bit on the tight side with this back mounted IND 42. But in any case, we're going to mount this one in front. So anyhow, that's the way we insert another instrument. So I've showed you how to use construction lines, how to line up with existing instruments. You can, if you're just starting from scratch, you can just put your instruments kind of where they look like they might fit and then line them up later using the lines. At this point, the other thing that we need to check is that we know where the origin is. In this one, it is in the lower left-hand corner. That's good. If it's not in the lower left-hand corner, the way to change the origin is to move from, I'm just going to move it to a random place right now. Select everything. Everything has to be turned on. You select a reference point and a target point. And again, we did this in an earlier one, but repeating, to move this to our origin, we're going to select everything. We're going to move from a manual intersection consisting of two entities. and now it's snapped to the intersection of those two entities. The command line says target point. I'm going to hit space bar and type in 0, 0 and enter. Delete original, and there we go. Let's save that. Now we can go over to AvCam, open it up in AvCam, drawing 1. And in this case, we only used layer 2 before. We're going to select 2 and outside. Let's take a look and see what we've got. The circles are not circles, they're elongated a little bit, so you can tip out the Aspen instrument without it binding up in the panel. There's a little pivot point on the bottom of this latch, and you pivot it out towards you, and the hole has to be elongated in order for the instruments behind the panel to clear the panel. So with that in mind, let's simulate that. Remember, you can simulate this from your office. You do not have to be hooked up to the Panel Pro. In most cases, people do their drawing at their desk and then just go out to the Panel Pro, either with a thumb drive or a network connection, and cut the panel there. In any case, you can prove that the drawing is ready to cut at your desk without having to go to the Panel Pro. So you do want to set a couple settings. You need to know that in this case we're going to use auto toolpath, and then the settings that are really relevant is the end mill diameter and the number of passes. Those are important, and you should in most cases have finish cut checked. So with that in mind, you can just hit simulate, and let's see what we've got. And so far so good. We don't have any problems. AvCam says it's going to take about 19 minutes to cut this. So what happens if you do have a problem? Say if you've got a gap here someplace. Let's make an obvious problem. I'm going to make an obvious problem here. Going to be easy to see. So let's just save this. Go alternate tab back to AvCam, hit reload. Now the nice thing about reload is you don't have to go through all these dialogues. It just loads up the last panel that you had saved or that you had opened and opens it up again. Now, some CADs do things a little bit differently. For instance, in AutoCAD, you have to explicitly close the file before any other program, including AvCam, can read it. With QCAD and many others, it's simply just hit one button. In this case, I'm just going to zoom to extents, hit one button, go over to AvCam and reload, and done. Now I can physically see the gap there, but let's simulate. And first of all, you see something weird going on here. And you can see it's got a problem. Why did it show here and not here? It's just the way that the DXF came through and the way AvCam read it. But in this case, let's go ahead, we can see where the gap is. Let's close that up and go from there. Again, in QCAD, you can just grab the handle and just place it right there. What's a little bit more subtle is if you've got overlapping lines. So say, for instance, I take a line and just overlap it there. Let's just make that, we don't want to cheat, we want to make this nice and hard. So let's make that the same color. Oh, these were all just plain red. Nope, they were custom color. Okay, so anyhow, we've got two lines that are overlapping. If we zoom in far enough, we can see those as well. Not always, but let's see if we make this a little bit harder. Let's just take this line, and there's the middle. We're going to make both of these the exact same color so that they're not obvious. So now we can zoom in all day long and we can't necessarily tell that there's another line there. Let's save this. Go back to AvCam, reload. Yeah, my drawing wasn't that great. You can actually see it there. But immediately it flags it and shows where the issue is. So again, let's just go in here. QCAD, just like I said, I can go in here, do the alternate key, and then left click, and it gives us the lines that are there. It allows us to select whichever one we want. This particular one has a short line in the corner. This will work, but a better way to draw it is just with long continuous lines. There's less problems of, or less probability of errors creeping in. Let's just give us another error here. Let's see once what this one does. Oh, let's overlap this one a little bit. So this is a fairly common scenario that I've seen. And this would be, you could zoom in there quite a ways and it's going to be pretty hard to see. So let's take a look at this and see once what happens with this one. Simulating. So unconnected ends found. So we can zoom into that, and like I said, it's we may be able to find it by zooming in, but it says again, unconnected ends found. See view error points button on entity list. Well, the entity list is right beside the layer selection or the layer box, right beside the mode selection. Error points is right there, and it brings up Notepad and it gives us those lines that are a problem for us. And in this case, it gave us another one out here, 10.37. So let's go back to QCAD. Let's just put a line, or a correction, a little circle. And this should be fairly small, like 1/10 of an inch. And then at the position, I'm copying this from the list box. So now it drew that right at the end. Now I can zoom into this area and maybe find out what's going on. I can see that I highlighted to the left of that center, and it shows me that what might be going on. So I should be able to take this end and match it up properly, and that should work. Now there was another one. Let's see what's going on with that one. That one may or may not be valid. Let's make another circle, and I'm copying again. Let me just put this so you can see it. I'm just copying it from Notepad. Into the command line. Oh, that's just right over here. So we've already corrected that, so no problem whatsoever there. So we should be good to go again. Let's save it. Get rid of our Notepad. Go back to AvCam. Reload. Simulate. So it's not unusual to see that AvCam will give you an error in two different places. One will be the valid place, one will be the invalid place, just because it winds up in the sequence of joining these entities together. It can't no longer find a match for it. So anyhow, this is all ready to go. It's saved. All you got to do is put it on the panel pro, put a piece of metal on your panel pro, hit cut. Now we're not connected to the panel pro, so the button will show orange. That means that it's simulated okay, but we can't cut it because we're not connected to the panel pro. If we had a raw drawing there and looked at it, now it would be red because this drawing has not been simulated. After we simulate it, now it's orange because it's simulated okay, but we're not hooked up to the panel pro. So anyhow, thank you for watching. That's it for tonight.